Yesterday, the Las Vegas Raiders made a big move by hiring John Spytek as their new general manager. While Spytek may not be a household name for most fans, he brings a wealth of experience from his time with the Buccaneers, Eagles, Browns, and Broncos. However, there's still a lot we don't know about him. For example, what's his approach when it comes to draft picks? What are his thoughts on key positions and building a team? I've spent some time listening to his interviews and podcasts to get a better sense of his style, and let me tell you, there are some really interesting insights. Today, we'll dive into some of the thoughts he's shared, focusing on how he approaches free agency, the draft, and team building. One of the most important aspects of being a successful general manager is how you handle both free agency and the draft. It's not just about picking players, but about understanding the type of talent your team needs and how to fill those gaps. For example, when evaluating offensive tackles, there are different traits I value. A player like Olu Fashanu, who came out in last year's draft, was my top-rated tackle because of his exceptional movement. Some GMs place a high value on a player's agility and fluidity on the field. However, that's not the case for every team. Take the Bengals, for example. They have Trent Brown as one of their tackles, and last year they drafted Marius Mims, a player who's not known for his movement. The Bengals clearly don't prioritize that trait. Spytek was also asked about his approach to free agency and how he assesses players. He emphasized that you can't always land the exact players you want, but at the end of the day, you need to focus on bringing in good football players with high character. He pointed out that in free agency, it's not just about athletic ability. It's about finding players who are truly committed to the game. He values competitive players who love football, rather than those who might have character concerns, even if they have great physical traits. Spytek's focus is on the person first, ensuring they fit the culture of the team. It's not just about filling a position, but about building a roster that makes sense for the long-term success of the team. John Spytek's approach to free agency is clear. They're not just bringing in players for the sake of filling spots. Just like in the draft, the Raiders want players who fit their system and can contribute meaningfully to the team. What stood out to me from his comments is his strong focus on high character. He's looking for players who love the game and are committed to being the best. These are the types of players that make a real impact, both on and off the field. As fans, we don't always see what goes on behind the scenes, and we might not fully understand the character of the players being considered. But I had an opportunity recently to talk with a lot of different players at a combine event, and I learned just how important character is. Out of the group, there were a handful of players who stood out as having great character. These guys were not only skilled, but also showed leadership, discipline, and a passion for improving. After practice, they stayed behind to work on their technique, like the players from Colorado, who worked with coaches on their fundamentals. In contrast, there were others who didn't show the same level of commitment, choosing to leave early instead of putting in that extra work. This experience really reinforced how important it is to evaluate a player's character, not just their skills. For Spytek and the Raiders, high character is a top priority in free agency. He's not swayed by a player's physical traits alone. Speed, strength, and athleticism aren't enough to win a roster spot. Spytek made it clear that traits like these don't always translate to success on the field. He's absolutely right. I'll take a player's production on tape over their athleticism every time. Take Olu Fashanu, for example. Not only is he highly mobile for an offensive tackle, but he also showed great production at Penn State. His skills were evident, and he translated that into success with the Jets. On the other hand, you have players like Tyree Wilson, who was selected 7th overall by the Raiders last year based on his traits. Traits can look good on paper, but they don't always pan out. Spytek is emphasizing the importance of picking players with high character and proven production, and I think that's a smart strategy for building a successful team. When evaluating players, it's important to prioritize production over physical traits. While traits like speed or strength can be valuable, they should never outweigh what a player has shown on the field. In the end, it's the player's performance and how they contribute to their team that matters most. I completely agree with John Spytek's philosophy here. It's all about finding players who have demonstrated their skills through solid production and who also have high character. This approach gives you the best chance to build a winning team. Of course, not every draft pick will work out, and you can never fully predict how a player will develop in the NFL. But generally speaking, if you take a player with strong college production and a passion for football, they're much more likely to succeed at the next level. This is one area where I think the Raiders have made mistakes in the past, choosing traits over actual production. Take Tyree Wilson, for example, or even Byron Young, the defensive tackle. Young had impressive physical traits, but his college tape didn't back it up. We ended up drafting him earlier than we probably should have, missing out on other players who had more consistent tape. That's why I think spytek's approach, focusing on production first, is the way to go. One area the Raiders really need to focus on this offseason is the running back position. It's the biggest gap on the offensive side of the ball right now. While quarterback is always a wild card and the team might not go for one this year, positions like running back, offensive line, and wide receiver are a bit easier to assess and improve. Spytek has experience with building successful rosters, and it's interesting to note that during his time with the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, he was heavily involved in their draft process over the past couple of years. Unlike some GMs who speak right after the draft, Spytek was consistently the one coming out to discuss the Buccaneers' picks. This tells me he had a significant hand in the team's drafting strategy, and judging by the feedback from Buccaneers fans, his contributions were highly valued. It seems Spytek's impact on the draft was much greater than some might realize, and that's a positive sign for the Raiders moving forward. John Spytek's role with the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, especially in the drafting process, seems to have been more influential than many realized. It appears that Spytek had a significant hand in shaping the team's draft board, making decisions on which players to prioritize. This kind of responsibility usually falls to an assistant general manager, but Spytek's input seemed to carry more weight. Not every NFL organization operates the same way. Some GMs may delegate the draft process, while others, like the Raiders' Tom Telesco, might want to take charge themselves. In Tampa Bay, however, it seems Spytek was largely in control of the draft, and this gives us a glimpse into his ability to lead and make key decisions. Spytek also shared some insights into what he values in running backs. He talked about how he looks for players who, even if they're not the biggest or fastest, can still make an impact on the field. For example, he mentioned Bucky Irving, a smaller back at 5'9" inches and under 200 pounds, but with impressive production. Spytek acknowledged that Irving might not be the type to bulldoze defenders, but he's hard to bring down, and his 6 yards per carry in both Minnesota and Oregon speaks volumes about his ability to move the ball. The key qualities Spytek looks for are elusiveness, toughness, and high character. Irving might not be the fastest running back with a 4.56-second 40-yard dash time, but what stands out is his ability to get yards and score touchdowns. According to Spytek, the best running backs aren't always the fastest. They're the ones who defenses struggle to take down, no matter their size or speed. This mentality highlights Spytek's focus on production and toughness, rather than just relying on physical traits like size or speed. He values instinctive, hard-to-tackle runners who make plays when it matters. Whether it's a 4.3 or 4.7 in the 40-yard dash, what truly matters is the player's ability to perform and make a difference on the field. This approach fits perfectly with Spytek's overall philosophy of valuing production and character over physical traits alone. One of the most interesting takeaways from John Spytek's conversation with Bucky Irving was when Irving said, "I can guarantee you that the first guy will not tackle me." Spytek seemed to really remember this, and it's easy to see why. It's a powerful statement that rings true for a lot of running backs. Spytek, who speaks with countless scouts, players, and coaches, still remembered this line, which shows how important it was. The fact that Irving is confident in his ability to avoid the first tackler speaks volumes about his elusiveness, which Spytek clearly values. This idea of avoiding the first tackler really resonates with me too. When I started evaluating running backs years ago, I had a different mindset. Back then, I thought all running backs were pretty much the same. Big, fast guys who could bulldoze their way through defenders. But now, I realize that there are different types of running backs, and each can have success in their own way. Take Saquon Barkley, for example. He has incredible vision and quick feet. If he's running in one direction and sees an opening, he can instantly change direction and take off. He has that jump cut ability that makes him so dangerous. Then you have guys like Josh Jacobs. He might not have the same elite movement as Barkley, but he has excellent vision and the ability to make himself skinny in tight spaces. Jacobs doesn't have blazing speed, but he's hard to tackle and can power through defenders when necessary. Nick Chubb is another great example. He's a bit of a blend between Jacobs and Barkley. Chubb has great contact balance and vision, and he can be just as effective as the others in his own way. Bucky Irving, who Spytek talked about, is another example of a running back who might not fit the traditional mold. At 5'9", and under 200 pounds, some might dismiss him, but he has the ability to make defenders miss and pick up yards in space. Spytek recognizes that Irving is hard to bring down, and it's this type of elusive, tough running style that can make a big difference. Looking ahead to the upcoming draft, there are several talented running backs, including Ashton Jat, who many expect to go in the top 15. While he's likely to be a great player, spytek seems to think there are other running backs who could also be excellent, but might not require a top pick. For instance, Caleb Johnson from Iowa could be a great fit as well, but the Raiders might be able to get him later, perhaps at pick 38 or even in the third round. This shows that, like spytek, teams don't always need to reach for a top running back when there are solid options later in the draft. It's all about finding the right fit for your system and getting the most value for your pick. This year's draft class has a strong group of running backs, and spytek seems to have a keen eye for identifying players who can make a big impact without necessarily needing to be first-round picks. For instance, there are guys like Caleb Johnson, Hamilton from UNC, and RJ Harvey from UCF, each with their own unique style and ability to make defenders miss. It's clear spytek isn't just looking for a running back to fill a roster spot. Instead, he wants players who can excel in space, make defenders miss, and succeed in the NFL. It feels like spytek values finding hidden gems in the draft, players who might not be the flashiest names but can still have a big impact. Personally, if I were in the Raiders' shoes, I'd target a running back in the second or third round, perhaps along with a guard, to balance out the offensive needs. Speaking of offensive line, spytek also touched on guards during his interview, and while he expressed some positive views on players, there's one area where I'd challenge his opinion. He mentioned Elijah Klein, a guard from UTEP, who was drafted by the Buccaneers in the 6th round. Klein, a 6'4" trawwhite, 320-pound guy, might not have been on many people's radar, but spytek praised his physicality, his ability to finish plays, and his relentless effort to protect the quarterback and control the line of scrimmage. He seems like a solid player who gives it his all, which is exactly what you want in an offensive lineman. However, one thing I've noticed is that not all 330-pound players are built the same. At the Hula Bowl, for instance, I saw that some players at that size were built much more athletically, and others were a bit more bulky. For example, Luke Kondra, an offensive lineman from Cincinnati, has a different build than Klein, even though they might weigh about the same. Kandra is built more compact and athletic, which could make a difference when it comes to NFL readiness. So, while I appreciate spytek's praise for Klein, it's important to consider how different body types can affect a player's potential, especially on the offensive line. The physical differences in offensive linemen are fascinating to consider. For example, you look at players like Luke Kandra, who has an incredible build, with broad shoulders and a strong, athletic frame that screams power. Then you have other players at the same weight who don't look as well built or as strong. It's a great reminder that how a player is physically constructed can play a big role in their success, especially on the offensive line. spytek seems to have an eye for spotting players who are built well and are ready to perform at a high level. He mentioned a few Buccaneers players, like Elijah Klein, 6 feet 4 inches, 320 pounds, and Gar Barton, 6 feet 5 inches, 315 pounds, who are both incredibly strong and well-built, which certainly gives them a leg up in terms of NFL readiness. What I really appreciate about spytek's approach is his emphasis on competition. He mentioned that they're not locked into the idea that a player's draft position will automatically dictate where they play. For instance, even though they drafted Barton as a center, if another player performs better at center, spytek has no hesitation about moving Barton to guard. This willingness to adapt and let players compete for their spots shows that spytek values hard work and talent over draft position, which is exactly how it should be. The competition for jobs ensures that only the best players rise to the top, and that's how you build a strong team. The example of Bucky Irving's confidence is another reflection of spytek's philosophy. When a player says, "I guarantee the first guy won't tackle me," that's a sign of serious confidence. It shows that the player believes in their ability and isn't backing down from a challenge. spytek clearly values that kind of mentality. Players who are self-assured, with high character and a love for the game. It's a refreshing approach, and one that I think will help the Raiders build a solid foundation. However, I do have a bit of criticism for spytek's decisions, specifically when it comes to drafting Gar Barton over Jackson Parham. Barton is a solid player with great tape, no doubt about it, and he'll likely be a great center in the NFL. But Parham was another guy who stood out on film, and it's tough to see Barton, who had been a tackle, taken over a more natural center prospect like Parham. Barton's transition to center is expected, but I do wonder if Parham could have provided a bit more immediate impact. Still, Barton should develop into a great player, and the team's commitment to competition will help him prove his worth in the long run. It's clear that Jackson Paris Johnson is a top-tier talent, and you're not alone in your opinion that he could potentially be the best center in the NFL. His tape at Oregon was dominant, and it's hard to ignore the physical and technical aspects of his game that make him stand out. I agree with you that he's already at an elite level, and comparing him to guys like Creed Humphrey and Quentin Nelson is fair. He's on that path to greatness. His combination of strength, technique, and ability to dominate his opponents is rare, and I can see why you think he's better than someone like Humphrey, despite the latter's proven track record in the NFL. As for the decision to take Guy Barton over Paris Johnson, it does raise some eyebrows. Barton is a solid player, no doubt, but when you compare his potential to Johnson's, it's hard not to question that choice. It's not that Barton will be bad. He could very well develop into a starting caliber player, but Paris Johnson seems like an obvious blue-chip prospect that could anchor a line for years to come, and the Raiders might have missed a golden opportunity to grab him. Your point about the Buccaneers taking Kyle Trask in the second round a couple of years ago is also interesting. It could be one of those picks that makes sense in hindsight if Trask develops into something special, but it's certainly a question mark at the moment. It's a reminder that not every draft decision will immediately bear fruit, but as we saw with other picks, it's about long-term development and finding hidden gems. When spytek talks about the scouting department and its structure, it's evident that he places a high value on clear communication and unity. By having everyone on the same page in terms of grading, character assessment, and player evaluation, the team can make consistent decisions that align with their goals. It's a smart approach, especially when it comes to making sure all scouts understand exactly what the organization values in players and how they want to build the team. Continuity in a department is key to success, and it sounds like spytek has a well-oiled machine when it comes to the scouting process, especially with his tenure and experience in the league. Overall, I like the direction spytek seems to be heading in terms of player evaluation, team building, and how he structures his department. His attention to detail and the emphasis on character and competition are important factors in building a sustainable, successful team. But it's definitely fair to critique certain decisions, like taking Barton over Johnson, as that could be a missed opportunity down the line. John Spytek's emphasis on consistency really hits home, especially when it comes to scouting and coaching. As he mentioned, when you constantly change out personnel, whether it's scouts or coaches, it leads to a lack of continuity, and that can make the process of building a team far more difficult. If a general manager or coaching staff constantly has to explain their vision from scratch, it disrupts the flow and makes it harder to execute the long-term strategies needed for success. This is something the Buccaneers have clearly gotten right over the years, which has contributed to their ability to build a competitive roster that eventually won them a Super Bowl with Tom Brady. However, as you pointed out with the Raiders, consistency has been a major issue. The Raiders have had constant turnover in leadership and coaching staff, which has made it difficult for the team to find stability and grow over the long term. It's easy to see why Ben Johnson might not have wanted to come to a franchise with that level of inconsistency, but ideally, spytek can start building that stability in the coming years. If he can bring in a coach, let them build the team, and maintain that consistency, it could set the Raiders up for success in the future. The idea of bringing in a coach like Pete Carroll or Cliff Kingsbury, who both have experience leading teams and building competitive rosters, could be a step in the right direction. If spytek can build the foundation of a strong team and create a stable environment, the Raiders could eventually land that elite-level coach who can take them to the next level, much like Kyle Shanahan or Sean McVay did with their respective teams. You're right that the next few years will be crucial for the Raiders. The key will be allowing the team to evolve and grow without constant upheaval. If they get the right structure in place with the right people, they could be in a strong position moving forward. Hopefully, they'll find that balance between building a solid roster and finding a coach who can lead them to consistent success. It sounds like you put a lot of time and effort into making this video, and it's clear you're passionate about the Raiders' future. I think your insights about consistency and team building are spot on. Let me know what you think about how things might play out with spytek at the helm.